We haven't seen our grandchildren in 6 months. It's a silence that screams, a void carved out by our daughter, Olivia, who believes we don't deserve them. Her demand was simple, she said. Give up our 2-bedroom condo in the city, the one we've spent our lives in, and trade it for her cramped 1-bedroom apartment. A simple swap, she called it. A simple sacrifice of our comfort, our history, our entire lives for her convenience. My husband Nicholas and I refused, and for that we were erased. Olivia married about 3 years ago. Her choice of a husband, a boy named Ethan, was a decision that felt like a punch to the gut. He was the kind of young man you want to wrap in a blanket and send back to his mother. No real work experience, no concept of the world beyond his phone screen, no practical skills to speak of. But the boy had dreams. Oh, he had dreams. Enough to fill a stadium. One day, he was a crypto blogger, the next a visual storyteller, a photographer without a camera, and the day after, a freelance graphic designer who couldn't use Photoshop. Our Olivia, at least, had a college degree. She had a profession, something tangible in her hands. Ethan had potential. That's what she called it. Nick and I tried everything to talk her out of the wedding. Live together if you must, we pleaded, but why rush into a legal contract? What's the hurry? But it was no use. They were in the throes of that once-in-a-lifetime, earth-shattering love that only 22-year-olds can truly believe in. So we bit our tongues and paid for the wedding. Ethan's parents, the Millers, chipped in a good amount. They were decent people, grounded and hardworking. It was a mystery how they produced a son who seemed allergic to both. Our daughter, our star, and her prince of empty promises, a match made in some ironic, celestial joke. We were monsters. We let the newlyweds move into my mother's old 1-bedroom apartment, a small but cozy place we'd held onto. The Millers, to their credit, paid for a full renovation. It was a perfect starter home. All they had to do was live in it. And, work. But work was a 4-letter word in their vocabulary. They were always chasing projects, launching startups, and then, like clockwork, they'd come running to us, their parents, for money. It drove Nicholas insane. She has a husband, he'd rage, his voice tight with frustration. Let him provide for her. I couldn't just stand by and watch them struggle. I'd slip Olivia cash behind his back, my heart aching for the 2 lost children playing house. The day they announced they were expecting a baby, the room was thick with a mixture of joy and dread. On one hand, the thought of grandchildren, of tiny hands and sleepy smiles, was a dream we'd long held. On the other, these 2 couldn't even feed themselves. How could they possibly raise a child? But Ethan, with a newfound, almost comical seriousness, beat his chest and swore he'd move mountains for his child. He'd unload trucks, he'd dig ditches, he'd do whatever it took to give his baby the world. And to our surprise, he actually got a job. A real 9-to-5 job in some downtown office. The pay was laughable, a pittance in a city like New York, but it was stable. A regular paycheck. I felt a flicker of hope. If only Olivia would settle down, find a decent job before the baby came, they might just make it. But she drifted from one temp gig to another, dismissing our advice with an eye roll and a sigh. The Millers and I had a summit. We decided to pool our resources and buy everything the baby would need. The young parents-to-be were barely scraping by. Without our help, they'd be destitute. We found out they were having a girl, and the shopping began. We bought a crib, a changing table, a mountain of clothes. We assembled the furniture, our hands working together to build a nest for the grandchild that would connect our families forever. When we were done, the apartment was transformed. The nursery was a picture of perfect preparation, a closet bursting with tiny dresses, and a top-of-the-line stroller waiting on the balcony. We had provided everything, down to the last detail. Ethan walked through the rooms, his face flushed with what I hoped was a dawning understanding of the immense financial weight of fatherhood. Olivia seemed pleased. accepting our contributions as her due. The birth of our granddaughter, Lily, was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. The hospital room was filled with flowers and balloons, our two families united in a bubble of bliss. In those first few weeks, Mrs. Miller and I were a constant presence in their apartment. We taught them how to hold the baby, how to feed her, how to bathe her. We were a team, the four of us, navigating the choppy waters of new parenthood. The young couple were quick learners, and soon we could see they were managing on their own. We started to visit less, giving them space to become a family. We were always just a phone call away, ready to swoop in with advice or a helping hand. Ethan got a promotion. His salary was still modest, but it was a step up. He seemed to have shed his boyish immaturity, replaced by a quiet, determined focus. Fatherhood had changed him. Olivia, too, had softened. The restless energy that had always defined her was now channeled into a fierce, protective love for her daughter. Nick and I finally allowed ourselves to breathe a sigh of relief. They were growing up. They were taking their marriage, their responsibilities, seriously. The foolishness of their youth seemed to be fading, washed away by the tide of real life. We thought the worst was over. We were so wrong. Lily was just 18 months old when they dropped the second bombshell. Another baby was on the way. I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. I was vehemently against it. My own sister had children close in age, and it had nearly broken her. We'd all pitched in, a rotating army of family members, just to keep her afloat. And Olivia, she still hadn't held a steady job. Another baby meant another long stretch out of the workforce, no seniority, no benefits. But my biggest concern was their living situation. A one-bedroom apartment was already a tight squeeze for three. How in the world would they manage with four? I laid out my concerns to Olivia, my voice calm and measured. I spoke of my sister's struggles, of the financial strain, of the sheer logistical nightmare of raising two children in such a small space. She dismissed my words with a wave of her hand, her eyes flashing with a familiar spark of defiance. "You only see the negative, Mom," she said, her tone laced with condescension. "We'll have the money from the state," she explained, as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "We can use that for a down payment on a mortgage. And then we'll figure it out. We can rent out the one bedroom, and one of you can retire and watch the kids while we work." The simplicity of her plan was staggering. The casual way she mapped out our lives, our retirement, as if it were hers to command. It had never occurred to me that my golden years would be spent as a full-time, unpaid nanny. I was sure Mrs. Miller felt the same. And a mortgage? On their income? No bank in their right mind would approve it. I told her as much, my patience wearing thin. She rolled her eyes and stormed out, shouting over her shoulder that they would figure it out without us, just like they had with the first one, a feat accomplished entirely on the back of our financial support. When Mrs. Miller spoke to Ethan, she received a similar response, "Stay out of it." We conferred, the two of us, and came to a grim conclusion. We had done everything we could. Now they were on their own. We would still help, of course, but we wouldn't be their safety net anymore. Not like before. And so we stepped back. They lived their lives, and we lived ours. The baby clothes and the stroller were still there, waiting for the new arrival. I asked Olivia what they needed for the baby, and she replied with a curt, "Nothing." I assumed, foolishly, that they had taken my words to heart and were finally taking some financial responsibility. I was wrong. The truth, when it was revealed, was far more shocking. We arrived at the apartment after the new baby, a boy they named Leo, was brought home from the hospital. The air was thick with the sweet, milky scent of a newborn, but something was off. The same single crib stood in the corner of the bedroom. "Where will the baby sleep?" I asked Ethan, my voice betraying my confusion. He mumbled something unintelligible and disappeared into the kitchen. I turned to Olivia, repeating the question. She shrugged, her eyes avoiding mine. Lily will sleep with us. We'll put Leo in the crib. But that's not practical, Mrs. Miller chimed in, her brow furrowed with concern. No one will get any sleep. You should have bought a second crib. Well, if you're so smart, you should have bought one, Olivia snapped, her voice dripping with venom. We don't have any extra money. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. The accusation, the raw, unadulterated entitlement, was a slap in the face. I asked you what you needed, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. You said nothing, Dot. Did I have to spell it out for you? She shot back, her eyes blazing. My husband is the only one working. I'm at home with a newborn. Where would we get the money? Or do you just enjoy watching us humiliate ourselves and beg? I didn't recognize my own daughter. This bitter, resentful woman was a stranger to me. I bit my tongue, the words I wanted to say catching in my throat. Nicholas and I left without another word. I swore to myself I wouldn't go back until I was invited. I couldn't bear to be the villain in her twisted narrative any longer. The invitation came 6 months later, for Lily's 2nd birthday. We arrived with presents, our smiles plastered on our faces. The Millers couldn't make it, they were down with the flu. I noticed that a second crib had never materialized, but I kept my mouth shut. The party started off pleasantly enough. We celebrated the birthday girl, made toasts, and cooed over baby Leo. Then, with a casualness that was utterly chilling, Olivia brought up the topic of their living situation. The kids are growing so fast, she sighed, her eyes drifting around the cramped apartment. We're going to be bursting at the seams soon. And with a boy and a girl. I just don't know what we're going to do. The bank won't approve a mortgage, not with our income. She paused, her gaze landing on me, a predatory glint in her eyes. We had an idea, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. What if we swapped apartments? You and Dad could move into the 1-bedroom, and we could have your 2-bedroom. It would be so much more convenient for everyone. What do you say? No, I said, the word leaving my lips before I had even consciously formed the thought. Absolutely not. The audacity of the request, the sheer, unmitigated selfishness, was breathtaking. Your father and I have our routines, our lives. I go to bed late, he gets up early. We need our separate rooms. I'm not giving up my home, the home I've lived in for 30 years, because you made a series of irresponsible decisions. I warned you to think about this, and you told me you would handle it. So handle it. Olivia's face contorted with rage. She shot up from her chair, her body trembling. I thought you loved me, she hissed, her voice thick with tears. But you only love yourselves. If you don't change your mind, you'll never see your grandchildren again. You don't deserve them. Nicholas started to say something, but I stopped him. There was nothing left to say. We gathered our things and walked out, the sound of Olivia's sobs echoing behind us. That night, we both had to take medication for our hearts, the stress of the confrontation leaving us shaken and weak. We had raised a daughter who saw us not as parents, but as resources to be exploited, and when we refused to be used, we were discarded. Olivia calls from time to time. Her voice is cold, her question always the same. Have you changed your mind? Our answer is always the same. Nicholas is getting angrier. The 1-bedroom apartment they live in, the one they treat as their own, is in his name. It was his mother's. They seem to have forgotten that. His first impulse was to evict them, to throw them out on the street and let them learn the hard way what it means to be an adult. I've managed to hold him back, for now. But my influence is waning. If Olivia doesn't come to her senses soon, she's going to find herself in a world of trouble. A world of her own making. The silence that followed our departure from Lily's birthday party was not a passive absence of sound. It was an active, malevolent force, a living entity that grew and festered in the space between our two homes. It was a silence built of ultimatums and wounded pride, a wall of resentment so thick I could feel its suffocating weight every time I picked up the phone, only to put it back down again. For weeks, I replayed that afternoon in my mind, a masochistic loop of Olivia's tear-streaked face and her venomous words. "You only love yourselves." The accusation was a poison dart, and it had found its mark. Was she right? Had we become those selfish, detached parents who prioritized their own comfort above the needs of their children? I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of our spacious bedroom, the one I had refused to give up, and be consumed by a tidal wave of guilt. The silence from Olivia's end was a constant, throbbing reminder of my failure. Nicholas, on the other hand, was a fortress of righteous indignation. "We did nothing wrong," he would declare, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "We raised her, we educated her, we gave her a home. We've done enough." His anger was a shield, protecting him from the corrosive guilt that was eating me alive. But I knew that beneath the surface, he was just as wounded as I was. Olivia was his little girl, the one he had taught to ride a bike and helped with her calculus homework. Her betrayal had cut him to the core. The first crack in the wall of silence came not from Olivia, but from Ethan's mother, Carol. She called me one evening, her voice a hushed whisper, as if she were afraid of being overheard. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. I had no idea Olivia was going to do that. He's beside himself. He's trying to talk to her, but she's not listening." Carol's call was a lifeline, a fragile thread of connection in a sea of estrangement. We talked for over an hour, two mothers united in our shared bewilderment and pain. She told me that Ethan had been working extra hours, trying to save up for a bigger apartment, but it was a losing battle. The cost of living in the city was a relentless, unforgiving beast. Olivia, meanwhile, had retreated into a world of self-pity and righteous anger, convinced that she was the victim of our cruel, unfeeling selfishness. "She's not the same girl," Carol lamented, her voice cracking. "It's like this second baby, this financial pressure, it's twisted her into someone I don't recognize." Her words were a cold comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. It wasn't just us. Olivia's transformation was a source of concern for everyone who loved her. We weren't the villains she had painted us to be. We were just the most convenient targets for her rage. A few weeks later, I received a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of Lily, her face smeared with chocolate, a wide, gap-toothed grin on her face. My heart lurched. I stared at the image, my thumb hovering over the screen, tracing the outline of her chubby cheeks. Then a second text came through. "She misses her grandma." It was from Ethan. My hands trembled as I typed out a reply. "I miss her too, more than you can imagine." And so began our clandestine correspondence. Ethan would send me pictures and videos of the children, little glimpses into the life we were being denied. Lily taking her first steps, Leo's first smile, their shared giggles during bath time. Each message was a bittersweet cocktail of joy and sorrow. I would share them with Nicholas, and we would watch them together, our faces illuminated by the soft glow of the phone screen, two ghosts haunting the edges of our grandchildren's lives. Ethan told me that Olivia was becoming more and more isolated. She had cut off contact with most of her friends, convinced they were judging her. Her days were a monotonous cycle of childcare and resentment. Her only outlet, the vitriolic posts she would write on an online forum for new mothers. He sent me a link, and I descended into the rabbit hole of her digital misery. The forum was a cesspool of negativity, a place where unhappy mothers gathered to complain about their husbands, their children, and their unfulfilled lives. Olivia was a star contributor. She had crafted a narrative of victimhood that was both compelling and utterly false. In her version of events, she was a struggling young mother, abandoned by her wealthy, heartless parents who refused to help her, even as their grandchildren suffered in a cramped, squalid apartment. The other mothers on the forum rallied around her, their comments a chorus of outrage and sympathy. "That's horrible. How can they be so selfish? You should sue them for emotional distress. Cut them out of your life for good. You don't need that kind of toxicity." Reading her post was like being stabbed with 1,000 tiny needles. She had taken our private pain and twisted it into a public spectacle, a work of fiction designed to elicit sympathy and justify her own bitterness. I wanted to scream, to log on and refute her lies, to tell the world the truth, but I knew it would be pointless. In the echo chamber of the internet, truth was a casualty, and Olivia was the queen of her own tragic narrative. It's strange how these dark family secrets connect us. If this story is getting under your skin, subscribe for more real family exposés. The breaking point came on Thanksgiving. It was our first holiday without Olivia, and the silence in our apartment was deafening. I had cooked a full Thanksgiving dinner, more out of habit than any real sense of celebration. Nicholas and I sat at the dining table, the empty chairs a stark reminder of our fractured family. Halfway through the meal, my phone buzzed. It was a video from Ethan. Lily, dressed in a tiny pilgrim costume, was sitting at a small table, a plate of untouched food in front of her. "Say hi to Grandma and Grandpa," Ethan's voice prompted from off-screen. Lily looked at the camera, her lower lip trembling. "I want Grandma," she whispered, her voice barely audible. And then I broke. The sobs came from a place deep within me, a raw, primal sound of grief and loss. Nicholas rushed to my side, his arms wrapping around me, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. We clung to each other, two shipwrecked survivors on a desolate shore. That night, Nicholas made a decision. "I'm selling the apartment," he said, his voice devoid of its usual anger, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. "I'm not going to let her use it as a weapon against us anymore. And I'm not going to let her destroy her own life and the lives of our grandchildren because of her own foolish pride." I was stunned. "But where will they go?" "That's not our problem anymore," he said, his voice firm. "We've given them every opportunity, every advantage. It's time for them to stand on their own 2 feet, or fall. Either way, we're done." The next day, he contacted a real estate agent. The apartment was put on the market, and within a week, they had a buyer. The eviction notice was sent, a cold legal document that severed the last remaining tie between us and our daughter. The phone call from Olivia was not long in coming. Her voice was a shriek of disbelief and fury. "You're kicking us out? You're making your own grandchildren homeless? What kind of monsters are you?" "We're the monsters you created," Olivia, Nicholas said, his voice calm and steady. "We're the heartless, selfish parents you've been telling the world about. Well, now you're getting what you wanted. You're on your own." He hung up the phone, and a new kind of silence descended upon us. This one was different. It was not the silence of estrangement, but the silence of finality. The silence of a door closing, a chapter ending. The silence of a love that had been stretched to its breaking point and had finally, irrevocably, snapped. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and frantic, tearful phone calls from Olivia. She begged, she pleaded, she threatened. She promised to change, to be better, to do whatever it took to keep the apartment. But Nicholas was unmovable. The sale went through, and a new family moved into the apartment that had been in our family for generations. Olivia and Ethan were forced to move into a small 2-bedroom rental in a less desirable part of the city. The rent was exorbitant, and they were barely making ends meet. The dream of a spacious, comfortable home, the one they had believed was their birthright, had evaporated. And then something unexpected happened. Stripped of her sense of entitlement, her safety net gone, Olivia began to change. The bitterness and resentment that had consumed her began to recede, replaced by a quiet, desperate fear. She started to see the world not as a place that owed her something, but as a place where she had to fight for her own survival. She got a job, a part-time administrative position at a local community center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. She started cooking, learning to stretch their meager budget to make a little go a long way. She started to appreciate the small things, the things she had always taken for granted, and she started to talk to us. The first conversation was stilted and awkward, a minefield of unspoken accusations and unresolved anger. But as the weeks went on, the conversations became more frequent, more honest. She started to ask for advice, not as a demand, but as a genuine request for help. She started to listen. One evening, she called me, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said, the words I had longed to hear for so long. I was a monster." "No, you weren't," I said, my own voice choked with tears. "You were just lost." The road to reconciliation was long and bumpy. There were setbacks, moments when the old resentments flared up, when the scars of our shared trauma ached and throbbed. But we kept talking, we kept trying. We were a family and we were determined to find our way back to each other. One Sunday afternoon, there was a knock on our door. It was Olivia, Ethan, and the children. They stood on our doorstep, a little family, looking tired and worn, but whole. "Can we come in?" Olivia asked, her voice barely a whisper. I opened the door wide, and they stepped inside. Lily ran to me, her arms wrapping around my legs, her face buried in my skirt. I scooped her up, my heart overflowing with a love so fierce it took my breath away. Nicholas knelt down and lifted Leo into his arms, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated joy. We were a family again. A broken, battered, but ultimately resilient family. We had been to the brink and back, and we had survived. We had learned that love is not about giving in, but about holding on. It's not about sacrificing your own happiness, but about finding a way to be happy together. It's not about what you deserve, but what you are willing to fight for. And in that moment, surrounded by the laughter of our grandchildren, the quiet strength of my husband, and the newfound humility of my daughter, I knew that we had won the only battle that truly mattered. We had won back our family. This moment shattered everything I knew. If you're feeling this shock too, hit like. It helps uncover more hidden family truths. The climax of our family drama was not a single explosive event, but a slow, agonizing burn. It was the day the eviction notice was served, a crisp white envelope that held the power to detonate our lives. I remember the phone call from Olivia as if it were yesterday. The sound of her voice, a high-pitched shriek of disbelief and rage, is seared into my memory. "You're kicking us out," she screamed, her words a torrent of accusation. "You're making your own grandchildren homeless? What kind of monsters are you?" I stood in the kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, my body trembling. Nicholas was standing beside me, his face a mask of grim determination. He had warned me this would be ugly, but I was not prepared for the sheer, unadulterated venom in our daughter's voice. "We're the monsters you created, Olivia," Nicholas said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He had taken the phone from my hand, his knuckles white as he gripped the receiver. "We're the heartless, selfish parents you've been telling the world about. Well, now you're getting what you wanted. You're on your own." He slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the silent apartment. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What have we done?" I whispered, the words barely audible. "We've done what we had to do," he said, his voice softening as he pulled me into his arms. "We've cut the cord. It's the only way she'll ever learn to stand on her own." But in the days that followed, as Olivia's frantic, tearful messages flooded our phones, I began to doubt the wisdom of our decision. She begged, she pleaded, she threatened. She sent us pictures of the children, their innocent faces a silent, heartbreaking accusation. She accused us of destroying her life, of traumatizing her children, of being the cruelest, most unnatural parents in the world. Each message was a fresh wave of guilt, a new crack in my already fragile resolve. I started to have nightmares, visions of my grandchildren, cold and hungry, huddled together on a dark, deserted street. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my body racked with sobs. "We made a mistake," I told Nicholas one morning, my voice hoarse from crying. "We have to stop this. We have to help them." But he was unmovable. "No," he said, his voice firm. "We have to see this through. It's for her own good." The day of the eviction was the longest day of my life. I sat by the phone, my stomach in knots, waiting for the call that would tell me my daughter and grandchildren were out on the street. The call never came. Instead, I received a text from Ethan. "We found a place. It's small, but it's clean. We're moving in tomorrow." A wave of relief washed over me, so powerful it left me weak. They weren't homeless. They had a roof over their heads. It was a small victory, but it was enough. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment for all of us. Olivia and Ethan struggled to make ends meet in their new, more expensive apartment. The financial pressure was immense, and the strain on their marriage was palpable. They fought constantly, their arguments echoing through the thin walls of their small apartment. And yet, amidst the chaos and the struggle, something remarkable began to happen. Stripped of her safety net, her sense of entitlement shattered, Olivia began to change. The transformation was slow, almost imperceptible at first. It started with small things. She started clipping coupons, cooking meals at home instead of ordering takeout, taking the subway instead of a cab. Then, she got a job. A part-time, minimum wage job at a local coffee shop. It was a humbling experience for a woman who had always believed she was destined for greater things. But she stuck with it, her pride swallowed by the more pressing need to provide for her children. She started to talk to us again. The first few conversations were strained and awkward, filled with long, uncomfortable silences. But gradually, the anger and resentment began to fade, replaced by a new, unfamiliar humility. She started to ask for our advice, to listen to our suggestions, to see us not as adversaries, but as allies. The turning point came one evening when she called me, her voice choked with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said, the words I had been waiting to hear for so long. "I was so wrong." "I know," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "We all were." It was the beginning of our reconciliation, the first tentative steps on a long, difficult road back to each other. We started to see the children again, at first in neutral territory, a park or a playground. Then, one Sunday, Olivia asked if they could come over for dinner. That evening, as we sat around the dining table, the sound of our grandchildren's laughter filling the apartment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long, long time. We were a family again. A broken, battered, but ultimately unbroken family. We had been through the fire, and we had emerged, scarred but stronger. We had learned that love is not always easy, that it requires sacrifice and forgiveness, and a willingness to fight for the people you care about, even when they make it difficult. I still lie awake wondering, what would you have done when they tried to control your body? Share your truth in the comments. Subscribe for more shocking family revelations. The aftermath of our family's implosion was not a neat and tidy resolution. It was a messy, complicated, and often painful process of rebuilding. The scars of our shared trauma were deep, and they did not fade easily. There were days when the old resentments would flare up, when a careless word or a perceived slight would threaten to undo all the progress we had made. But we persevered. We learned to communicate, to listen, to compromise. We learned to forgive not just each other, but ourselves. We learned that a family is not a perfect, unblemished entity, but a living, breathing organism capable of healing and regeneration. Olivia continued to work at the coffee shop, and while the pay was meager, the experience was transformative. She learned the value of hard work, the dignity of earning her own money, the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. She started taking online courses, working towards a degree in early childhood education. She had discovered a passion for working with children, a passion that had been buried beneath years of entitlement and self-pity. Ethan, too, had grown. The crisis had forced him to confront his own immaturity, his own passivity. He started taking on more responsibility at home, sharing the burden of childcare and housework with Olivia. He started to see himself not as a boy playing at being a husband and father, but as a man with all the responsibilities and obligations that entailed. Our relationship with our grandchildren blossomed. We became a constant, steady presence in their lives, not as a financial safety net, but as a source of love, support, and guidance. We took them to the park, to the museum, to the zoo. We read them stories, we played games, we baked cookies. We reveled in the simple, everyday joys of being grandparents, joys that we had once taken for granted. One day, about a year after the eviction, Olivia and Ethan came to us with a proposal. They had been saving money diligently, and they had enough for a down payment on a small house in the suburbs. They had found a place they loved, a modest but charming little house with a small backyard. They wanted to know if we would be willing to co-sign the mortgage. Nicholas and I looked at each other. A year ago, the answer would have been an unequivocal no. But things were different now. Olivia and Ethan were different. They had proven themselves. They had earned our trust. Yes, we said, in unison. The day they moved into their new home was a day of celebration. We were all there, helping them unpack, arranging furniture, painting walls. The house was filled with laughter and a sense of shared purpose. It was a new beginning for all of us. That evening, as we sat in their new living room, surrounded by boxes and the happy chaos of a new home, Olivia turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you, Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," I said, my own voice choked with tears. "Never." Our family had been to the brink and back. We had been broken and we had been mended. We had learned that love is not a fairy tale, but a choice. A choice to forgive, a choice to heal, a choice to begin again. And as I looked at the faces of my children and grandchildren, I knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in my soul, that we had made the right choice.